much for joining us today for the first talk in our Psychology School seminar series 2022. So I'm very excited to introduce you to Islam, who's going to be presenting today. So Dr. Borinca, he is an assistant professor in the School of Psychology. He studies a range of different topics, including intergroup relations, discrimination, empathy, group norms, gender norms, lots of different topics. Today he's going to be presenting on the title From Prosocial Behaviours to Improved Intergroup Relations, the combined role of intergroup contact and intergroup norms. So I'm very excited to hear what you have to say. We'll have a few minutes for questions at the end, but yeah, take it away.
Thank you very much. So maybe there are people watching us online, right? So we should apologize for a bit delay from our side. So today I'm going to talk about intergroup relation, basically home norms, social norms, and how intergroup contact can interplay in a way that they can help improving them. So we know that when it comes to all groups, so in social psychology, we define people define themselves as in group and they identify with the group, and when they don't identify with a group, they usually call, in social psychology, we call it all groups. And these all groups can have different ethnicity, can have different religion, or even also sometimes different sex or gender. And usually when it comes to more stigmatized group, people tend to social categorize because they feel that their group gives them meaning as compared to the other group. And this is also based on past or current negative experiences. In some more complicated intergroup contexts, people might have war or negative experiences, which intensifies this desire to categorize and divide into us and them. But I just took a little example on which people can be categorized as in group, and someone who is different can be left alone. So when it comes to negative expectation, they can be also social norms as a part of it, because social norms can be inclusive, but at the same time it might be exclusive by exclusive, I mean that social norms which are not really calling for accepting the other, for social norms don't support social inclusion. And what happens when it comes to when norms, for example, are not inclusive and people have negative intergroup expectation, like even when people have a possibility to interact with someone, like with a refugee or immigrant, they don't do that because the norm and the negative expectation influence them. But then what happens when contact occurs, then people try to misunderstand that interaction, and if the interaction is prosocial, then people might misunderstand the behaviors. Oh, they were nice to me because they are just immigrants, or they are just refugees, or they have health issues, and not because they really wanted to help them or genuinely wanted to help them. So unfortunately, in this kind of language can be also in terms of the way we speak. So people who are biased against all group members, they try to see them as bad. They try to stigmatize them. They think that they are here to take their money, so which is like intergroup threat, and they even demonize them. They deny the human emotion. They think that they cannot feel the same emotion as us. And I just took a little example there of what Donald Trump would say, and he had a lot of dehumanization speech. Basically, they are like different from us, so let's get rid of them. And I try to show it in a funny way, like basically all groups are bad apple and we are like angels who are better, and then they are not. So the question that we try to answer, people like especially scholars in social and political psychology, is what we can do to improve intergroup relation and to bring people together in order to have more social inclusion and social solidarity among them. So now I'm going a bit before going to the basics. So basically we see that anti-outgroup attitudes can be felt because of the level of prejudice we can have, because we perceive threat, we think they are here to take our stuff or jobs, and we tend to discriminate them because we don't agree, we see them as less human as us. But at the same time, if intergroup contact, for example, if you have negative experiences with them, this can fuel anti-outgroup attitudes. And also, as I mentioned, social norms, if they are exclusive, if they call for they don't support social inclusion. But If intergroup contact and norms are positive, so if people have more positive intergroup interaction and norms are calling for social inclusion, then people might reduce anti-group attitudes. And basically, the whole idea of some new research nowadays in social psychology is that norm and contact, positive contact and positive norms interplay in a way that they help one another in order to kind of have an effect among people who are biased or threatened from all groups. So just going to the basics of intergroup contact theory, and we know from Alport that he said that the more people have contact with the other, with all groups, the less prejudice will be, the less bias will have. But he mentioned some factors that people need to have, like they need to be equal status. For example, they need all to have like kind of similar backgrounds and qualities and characteristics. They need to have a common goal. So basically, all groups need to work toward like something that is similar in order to improve their intergroup relations. He also said that intergroup cooperation, so both groups need to work to be willing to cooperate with one another, and in the end, which here norms can be a part of it, he said that this kind of interaction needs to be supported by authorities, law, or custom. So we can find social norm here. But before coming again to this, this was proven by Pettigrew and Trapp. So basically, through 696 samples, they showed that it's true. The more people have contact with refugees or immigrants or ethnic minorities, the less biased are against them. But they confirmed something else, that Alport's factors that Alport mentioned are just facilitating, but they are not really the key factors, because we know that it's hard to have equal status when the old group is a minority, is a social or sexual minority. So sometimes this kind of condition, and especially when it comes to hostile intergroup context, not everybody is willing to cooperate with one another. So these factors are just facilitating, but intergroup relation can be improved even if these criteria are not met. But here we're talking so far for direct contact, and we know that in many societies, people are not willing to have contact with one another, and even in societies like they call for social inclusion, not everybody has contact with immigrants, or especially with refugees. Maybe people tend to have more contact with immigrants or economical immigrants, but not with refugees. And what researchers have done, like in social psychology, have invented different forms of indirect contacts, in which they can help to reduce intergroup bias and negative intergroup expectation. I will just drink some water. So one simple form is the extended contact. So basically, it's the idea that mere knowledge that your friends have, all group friends, can help you to reduce bias. So it's very important to know that we can be a role model by having all group friends or friends. So research has shown, for example, here that when people know that people who had no friends, who had no group friends, then they show less affective prejudice, they show more positive evaluation of all groups, and they show, in general, they show less prejudice as compared to other people who have no all group friends. So, in addition to that, we have also another form is vicarious contact. So basically, it's the idea of us observing group members having positive interaction with all group members, and this can be done through vicarious learning. So basically, by seeing video or by learning stories about in-group and out-group interacting positively. This can be also through media, because especially in media, we see a lot of information about all group members. And what research has shown is that in vicarious contact, so when people vicariously saw the positive interaction of in-group with out-group, then they showed more positive effect as compared to a control condition. They were more willing to have contact with them, and they had more expectation and less anxiety or uncertainty to interact with out-group members as compared to a control condition. So just to come up with all the contact strategies, another way in which people can come to a kind of a contact with outgroup members is imaginary contact. So basically, it's asking people to imagine or envision a positive interaction with outgroup member, and then asking them after how do they feel in relation to outgroup members. And again, research has shown that when people imagine positive contact, then they show less bias, and they have more positive evaluation of the groups as compared to, they are exposed to a control condition such as outdoor scene or something like that. Finally, before bothering you with this, is that I want to show the e-contact, which is like the new, very recent theory from 2018, in which researchers have have created a virtual community in which in-group and out-group can interact with one another. And I feel like these findings come from Northern Ireland, and we see that here, when people had e-contact, so both Catholic and Protestant in Northern Ireland had more positive expectation and had less in-group anxiety, like they were less anxious when they had experienced the e-contact interaction as compared to a bad baseline. So it seems that e-contact can work even in more complex intergroup settings such as Northern Ireland. So let's come back to the norm. So what nowadays, like most of the societies are trying to be more like multicultural because of the immigration movements, but because also we know refugee crisis and so on. But when it comes to social influence, so basically normative influence impacts our attitudes, but we also impact the way we impact the others. And we know that attitudes are related to discrimination, policies, even to solidarity, cooperation, and altruism, and so on. And we know that anti-immigrant attitudes can be influenced because people have ideological beliefs. For example, political conservatism is related to less diversity. They don't want diversity. The more people are identified with their ethnic, national identity, they might be less open towards the others. And as I mentioned before, because of threatening perception. But in the end, we see that also it depends what are the norm, are our group members accepting the other, or are group members not accepting the others, and what kind of intergroup contact experiences we have. So, in the 9 theories, for example, so if you ask people, do you conform to your norm? They might say, oh no, I don't need the norm. I don't care what others think. Or some people might, conform or obey to the norm because of their instrumental motives. I just want to show some findings from Nolan et al. So basically, why? Yes, we wanted to see which kind of norm influenced people to save energy. So was it, let's say, control condition, was it because the norm is to protect the environment? Was it because the norm is to protect next generation? Was it for financial reason, or also like the neighbor, basically the normative here is like to protect the neighborhood. And people wanted to save energy when the norm was to save money. So if the norm is about saving money, people will start this norm as more important to save energy as compared to other norms. And then they went further to see why people wanted to save money. So what was the self-reported, like the correlation of the self-reported behavior? And so people, the more they wanted to save money, the more they anticipate their neighbors would do the same. So it's like, so when we anticipate something that all group members might do, it influences our behaviors or way of thinking. And again, I'm just bringing some other research from Switzerland. So basically, in this research, in one condition, Swiss participants were told that our country has received 1,000 of immigrants. In another condition, they have been told that we have received 100,000 immigrants, and they wanted to see that, to ask them how many of them they think that we should receive this year. So we see here, when there was a low anchor, so basically they were told to receive just 1,000, people wanted for this year to receive less as compared to the high anchor. Even in low anchor, so people wanted more as compared to the low anchor. So basically, sometimes the way we perceive the norm can be very informative for us, and then we can also be impacted by it. So if the norm is calling for less immigrants, or it's telling us that we receive less immigrants, then people are like, that should be the norm. They are okay with that. So we need norms because, we need this as a reference, in the way that when we make judgments for others, we need to have a reference. Basically, people, a simple example would be, oh, because we Swiss people think that, or we Irish people think that. So we need this kind of reference to make meaning to what we're saying. So that's the reason why we need them. And so basically, norms are everywhere nowadays, but the way, as I said before, it's kind of a bi-directional process, because norm influence us, but we also, with our behaviors, might influence norm, even if it is for good or it is for worse. So we know that norms can be descriptive, so what all group members think or do, or they can be prescriptive or injunctive, so what all group members approve. They can be informative, as I mentioned before, or can be normative, and they can be automatic if they are not controlled or deliberative. And we try to kind of make sure that this norm is really being implemented and respected and so on. And we mentioned there can be different moderators, but what we're interested in is let's see basically how individual groups and intergroup people react and perceive that. So I'm bringing again a study from Swiss context. So basically here, when people were exposed to a norm in which calls for equality towards immigrants, then people reduce discrimination, but only in low threat, but not in high threat. So meaning that sometimes even when norm is calling for equality and social inclusion, if people perceive threat, it can be an issue to them. So when it comes now trying to link intergroup contact and norms, so when it comes to intergroup contact, it can be sometimes the first-hand experience that we might have. So we met an immigrant, we met a refugee, we try to learn that the contact interaction provides us with the meaning of getting more information about them. And then what would be like specific hypotheses that we could test? So if contact is negative, then this reduced conformity to inclusive norms that are calling for social solidarity or inclusion, but increased conformity to exclusive norms that are calling for to be against social inclusion and solidarity. However, if contact is if contact is positive, then it reduces the conformity to positive social norm, and it reduces conformity to exclusive norms and norms that are against social solidarity. So an example here is that when norms were exclusive, we see that people had more prejudice when contact was low as compared when contact was high, but this effect was reduced or is to a less extent when norms are inclusive. So when norms are inclusive, then people have less prejudice in high contact when contact was low as compared when contact is high. So we see that contact is also important in order to kind of decrease prejudice, especially when norms are exclusive or against social solidarity. And again, in another study, imagining intergroup contact. So basically, as I mentioned before, asking people to envision a positive interaction with them, and as compared to a controlled condition in which people then they were exposed to a norm. In one condition, the norm was calling for social inclusion, in another condition, the norm was against social inclusion of immigrants. And what happened is that, so when norm was intolerant toward immigrants, then people showed more threat in control condition as compared to imaginative condition. Even though it was not affected to the norm, we see that imaginative contact reduced the perceived threat for at least for intolerant norm condition. So in some ways, it still is important, especially when this kind of normative influence is against to all group members. So, and another study, which is like in review for now. So basically what we find here is that people have more contact, the French people reported they have more contact with immigrants as compared with refugees. Quality of contact goes in the same way, and they are willing more to have B2B contact with immigrants as compared with refugees. And this is very important finding because people have more possibility to have contact with immigrants, especially as I mentioned, if immigrants are more integrated because of work or because of other reasons, but refugees tend to be located in a more isolated way, and people have less contact, and this affects the way they see them or the way they want to have contact in the future with them. So now moving from contact to prosocial behavior, and because I want to talk about prosocial interactions. And we know that prosocial behavior most of the time has the meaning to help the other, and one of the motivation there is empathy and altruism. But as I mentioned before, because of social solidarity, people always think that in-group member had good reasons and out-group members didn't have that, and this can be very difficult to promote because people are more tended to misunderstand about group social behaviors. So, for example, here in UK, participants were exposed to the predicament situation of in-group and out-group, and then empathy and helping intention were measured. People always want to empathize more with the in-group and wanting to help more with the in-group as compared to the out-group target. And then what happened, in the next experiment, they just focused on the out group target. And then in one condition, they told that all the group members are empathizing with them, which they call it empathy norm. In other condition, it was objective norm, so there was no empathy there. And participants, when they understood that all the group members, all the group members are empathizing with it, with that target, then they showed more empathy and more positive attitudes as compared to when norm didn't call for empathy. So it's interesting, even when we want to help someone, social influence impacts us. And now, turning back to my research. So again, using prosocial positive interaction, in which participants, in your own condition, they get help from any group or interact prosocial with any group member. In other condition, they do without group member. And then we show social norm. So in one condition, the norm is calling for social inclusion or for solidarity with other group members, and in other, it's against that, but we also have control condition. So what happened is that, yeah, when norm is positive, people show there is no bias about the helper. So both people think that I mean, there is no statistic difference here, but here the norm is intolerant against the outgroup. Then people think that in-group member had empathic reason to help them, that was not the outgroup. And then the same happened for altruism, and the same happened for instrumentality, but in a reverse way. The same happened for help acceptance, even though, like, when it comes to negative norm, that that they are more biased than positive norm, that they are less biased in terms of help acceptance. And this can be generalized even to intergroup contact. So where I want to go, because there are so many results like that, so basically is that positive norm, increased normative expectations. So people think that the other group members would behave the same, and this affects their personal expectations. So they think that interaction will be nice with them, and then they empathize with the helper, and then they show more altruism towards him or her, and then they want to help us to accept their help and have more intergroup contact in the future. So another issue is that I thought until now I always talked about norms, but I thought for all group norms. So basically, when it comes to norm, we have also all group norms. So basically, is how all group sees us, and if that normative perspective has changed. So what happens when we understand that we always thought that all group dislike us, but we understand that in fact all group is not anymore against us. So basically, all group norms. I know I said so many things. Okay. So I just want to see that in this case, for example, bringing intergroup apology. So understanding for a past misconduct, the group is apologizing, and in other conditions, the group is not apologizing, or the majority, because he is normative, all group norm. So what happened is that when majority of all group members are apologizing, which means that norm has changed, and people empathize more if they think that their helper, that I mentioned before, had more empathic reason to help as compared to other conditions. Even though they seem similar, they are still statistically different. The same happened for altruism, the same happened for instrumentality, and the same happened for help acceptance. And peace, people feel more at peace when all the group has expressed a normative apology. And again, if we switch from normative apology and we go to meta-dehumanization, if I think or I understand that the group humanizes me or dehumanizes me, basically, if I think that the group sees me as an equal human being or not, or in this case, we compare also if the old group likes me, what happens? And what we find here again, so let me just go quick. People attribute more empathy to old groups when they are exposed to information of meta-humanization, when they understand how group humanizes them as compared to other condition. The same goes for altruism, the same goes for instrumentality, but in a reverse way. And then the same goes for help acceptance and intergroup contact. So what happens is that meta-humanization increases positive old group evaluation, which in turn results in positive outcomes for adult group. But meta-dehumanization does the reverse. So if people understand the old group is still remaining in the state, have the same perspective towards us, then people have negative evaluation, and this, there is no empathy there or positive outcomes. So also, before I close this talk today, so I just want to see that most of the time what we do when we do study intergroup relation, we study in our comfort zone. So we study how Irish people are, how react towards immigrants or refugees, but we never like to study how Irish or Swiss people find, how do they act when they are in out-group context, or when they are in immigrants country. So in this research, now we will see that there are 5 experiments, but I'm just going to show some data. So we ask Swiss people to imagine themselves in a need situation, and in one situation they are in Switzerland, and in-group or out-group is helping them. So based on the condition, and in other condition they are in Kosovo, and in any group and out-group member is helping them. So what happens? So we see the results. What happens for that? So Swiss people, when they are in Switzerland, they think that the Swiss person who helped them had empathic reason as compared to the Kosovo one. But this effect disappears and tends to go in a different direction when they are in Kosovo. So when they are in out-group country, they seem not to be judging very harshly the out-group, but they do here when they are in their own context. And the same goes for altruism, and the same goes, but in a different way, for instrumentality. So it's for me, it's very interesting here because they think that he had instrumental reason. He wanted something in return. He didn't want it genuinely to help me, but here that effect disappears. And the reason is because the participants are very smart, so they know that in-group city, in-group helper is more capable to help them, which in terms they show more empathy towards him or positive motives, but they know that out-group helper in out-group city is our group country is more capable to help them. So they know, they are smart in acknowledging that the out-group has the capacity to help in their country, and thus they attribute more empathy and they are willing to interact with them. So just to go to the discussion, we see that contact is important, and sometimes when people have no interaction, direct interaction with one another, then indirect contact strategies are really important in order to kind of stimulate them to think about out-group members. And then norms are important, in-group norms are important, but also out-group norms in the way that out-group sees us is very important for us. And finally, the way they interact with one another, they can help, to improve intergroup relations. Even though we know that this are kind of short-term intervention, it's like the first way in which you try to change people's bias and thoughts that they have about out-group. Okay, that's all for me.
Thank you so much. Does anyone have any questions? Yeah, I did. Thanks a million, because that's not my area, so it's really interesting too. We have to say, obviously I was thinking of people with disabilities the whole time, trying to put that in somewhere. But at the end there, when you were showing, it was very interesting, you're asking people to consider, you as an in-group person on home territory, or when you're in another country.
Yeah.
This one here, yeah. And again, look, because I don't do research here, so bear with me, but I presume all of this is experimental work.
Yeah.
And then you kind of said, so we know that people think blah, blah, blah. And I guess I'm wondering, for the experimental work, do people follow these up with interviews then and ask people about their choices, or is it all experimental work in this? Is there any qualitative aspect? I'm just interested.
No, like it's all experimental. We didn't ask people about it, but I think that could be, a nice way to get more information why they made choices.
Whether it's valid or not, I don't know.
Yeah.
Because sometimes people don't actually know what they think the way they think. Do you know what I mean? But I just thought, can you imagine if you'd love to sit down and talk to these people and say, well, why did you, you were saying, well, they thought that it would be, somebody would help them out, and they were very clever about it. And I thought, what if they said differently? What if there was something else that, and maybe a qualitative thing might,
Yeah, they might. Actually, I just reviewed a paper about something like that, similar. So basically, people in one study, they wanted to help more they wanted to help more a less stigmatized group as compared to a stigmatized group member. And then when they were asked after why they did this, they felt morally wrong to help the stigmatized one. So I feel like maybe if you go and ask people, they might have different,
what they do and what they say.
Yeah, why they decided. So
I'd be interested if you presented them with the results and you said, this is actually what happened. And you kind of go, oh my God, I didn't. It'd be really interesting to know what their interpretation would be.
Yeah, I think, yeah. Yeah, I mean, we try to explain the mechanism, but yeah, I would be really curious to know why, like for example, in Kosovo, they changed their mind, like why they don't show input bias anymore. So I think that could be interesting to see in a qualitative way, like what was the decision they did, like why they changed.
Yeah, and whether you actually get the truth out of it or not, because a lot of this, isn't it, it's the kind of thing that people give socially desirable response to, but you actually have what they do here.
Yeah, but at the same time, it's the same time as in qualitative, they might be so smart, they don't want to
Yeah.
write so much, right? So it's you never know.
Yeah, that's really
When it's
interesting.
self-reported, it's yeah.
I suppose when they're away though, it's like, there's no real threat to them, it's a bit like people behaving differently on holiday. It's like a completely different, you know, people do things completely different, it's not their home.
Yeah.
There's no threat when you're somewhere else, because it's not.
You don't feel judged in the same way, or.
Yeah, well, and it's not, it's whatever happens when you're managing yourself in hospital or wherever, it's not affecting what's happening in what you regard as your sort of turf.
It's like you say like, so when you're outside of your country, you're like free bias, like bias free.
Yeah, because you don't care, the results of what happens to you, it doesn't seem like it's going to affect you necessarily. Do you know what I mean? Because it's someone else's problem in another country.
Yeah, but there's also a research on tourist effect. So sometimes when you travel around, you might understand all group like the social behavior of that, because you think that still they want something from you, which my point is go against it. But it can, you know, sometimes people might be a bit threatened because they don't know the context, and you know, you might be bias free, but then you're meeting people that you don't might speak the same language or don't have to share the same culture. Characteristics. So yeah, it's maybe the qualitative way can be.
Are all these things kind of, well, it's context dependent to what I'm just thinking out loud. If you look at Irish people, and if you looked at Irish people in the UK in, you know, the time of the Troubles and all that kind of thing, you certainly would have been very much an outgroup. But there may be a reason now why you go over and you're lauded, you know, so there's this, I suppose it's your norms thing, isn't it? How those norms develop of what's acceptable and what's not. But there would have been Irish people in not, you know, over the decades could go from being really the outgroup and, you know, not doors slammed in their face, everything, all the way up to if you went over to New York now, everybody thinks the Irish is great. So it's kind of time dependent a bit as well, whether you're a flavour of the month or not in another country.
Yeah, but that can be true. Like maybe also, like just related to comments, maybe because with the in-group member in your group country, like the identification is very strong, but with someone in-group like Irish or Kosovar that is living abroad, maybe that identification is not strong because you know that they have a different culture at the same time. So
I don't know if that's true though, because you know, if you've ever had that experience when you know you go on holidays and say, you know, you've had that experience and you meet somebody Irish in, you know, I don't know, Canada, and you're like, oh my God, you know, and you're like, you're suddenly best friends nearly, and you wouldn't even look at that person passing them on the street at home, but because you're both abroad, there's suddenly that nationality is a connection and forms that bond. So there can be that thing of like, there's like almost like an extra layer to that, like that somebody who may not be form part of your sub in-group at home is part of your in-group in comparison to everybody else when you're abroad.
yeah, but I do have an explanation for that, because that was the reason I did. Because I traveled, because I traveled to New York and I was in an easy situation. So before I did this research, I had this personal story, and then I had an in-group member helping me. I was so happy. Yeah, it was like, oh, Albania, and I go to Albania. And then after 30 minutes, I was like, is this person going to kill me? So I was like, you know, I was ducking, like, why the person suddenly is so nice? And then I just had all this bias in my head after 50 minutes. Then I was making sure, like, I remember having shower and just like stopping the shower and listening to everything. It's like, okay, so I feel when you're in need situation, things change. Maybe if you're not in need and you meet in the pub, then it's okay. But then you need that the person is helping you, then you think, okay, at least in my case, I was doubting. So
I have a question about one of your slides, I think there was perceptions versus like refugees versus immigrants.
Oh, yeah,
And
yeah.
refugees were held far lower esteem than the immigrants. Why would that be the case? I suppose we see it kind of similarly in terms of maybe in Ireland for the Ukraine versus refugees, and they're treated differently.
Yeah, so I'm just trying to find the
Do you actually think that ethnicity is coming in there, like groups of people who tend to be identified as refugees versus identified as, or it's like that idea of obviously it's really interesting of who gets called an immigrant and who gets called an expat.
Yeah.
Yeah, what is
Yeah.
that?
Yeah.
But
I'm not sure if you find, like, I know, I was just trying to find the reality. So the reason is like, if this is for France, so the reason is because in France, like refugees are located in a kind of more isolated, so the French people, they don't really have contact with refugees because they are like, I don't know if you call it shelters or the setting they are located, it's very isolated and they don't have contact, and they have more contact with immigrants because you have like, as I mentioned, immigrants can be, you know, you can meet, the job settings are diverse, so you have the possibility to have an immigrant colleague, as I'm here. So, but you don't have the possibility to have a refugee because they are not integrated, and that's the reason why they report more contact and they are willing because they know them more.
Okay.
So that's the reason.
But I suppose I'm just curious as well as to whether when people, so in, I don't know, in this study, did you mention what the nationality of the immigrants and the refugees was, or were people making their own inferences about who an immigrant is versus who a refugee is? Like, is a refugee Syrian, is an immigrant German? You know?
Yeah, you know, I think in that case, in this situation, we let them to make we just like use immigrants and refugees.
So there's potentially a couple of different layers in there. There's that
Yeah.
idea of the isolation, but there's also that, do they have an idea of like different ethnicity or different religion and so on associated with, for example, I've been thinking that like refugees are Syrian Muslims and that's a particular group versus immigrants are European or something. Are there other elements in there that are playing into that?
Yeah, but that's correct what you're saying. So there is actually literature in terms of empathy. So they call it similar and dissimilar. So it's not a good membership. So for example, German would show more if a Canadian helps them as compared to someone from Middle East or something like this. They would show more empathy to one Canadian because they perceive them similar as compared to the others. So in this case, maybe if you would say the immigrant is an Arab person, and you would say refugee is a Canadian one, I think the effect would be
that's what I'm wondering. Is it that distinction between immigration versus refugee status? Like, is it a distinction of status, or is it and isolation, or is it a distinction of nationality and ethnic identity? You know, and those, I think those things are kind of conflated. It's interesting.
It's just like for immigrants, I feel like, you know, in refugees, I think there are less chances to be from developed countries, so they know that refugees will be always for you know, coming for a political reason or coming from countries who are experiencing war. So I feel like I wonder if we hope now this would be if you say the refugees are from Ukraine.
So that's what I'm wondering. What if you split it and you said, okay, it's a Middle Eastern refugee versus a, you know, European immigrant, or then you turn that around and you're like, it's a South Asian immigrant versus a Ukrainian refugee. Does that flip the direction of the effect? You know, so is that
I don't know about Ireland now,
Yeah.
because you know, there are a lot of, you know, people seem a bit unhappy with the situation.
or if it's in France, so let's
But
say
in
it's like, is
France-
it like a North African immigrant versus
Yeah,
a
but
Ukrainian
like
refugee?
in France, I would say, like, if the refugee, if the refugee was Ukrainian and the refugee was from Afghanistan, then the effect would remain like this, exactly, because the normative perception, and it's especially news has been that they say that Ukrainians are like us, they are Christian, and which they differentiate the refugees from Afghanistan and stuff like that. So I feel like we would have a different effect if you specify the target, like what.
So it's just kind of interesting about what, like, this isn't a criticism at all. I just think it's really interesting about what the mechanism there might be and what factors are playing.
Yeah, I think that that could be sort of something that go more in details.
You mentioned, you mentioned about, you know, how effective the contact is, and I always slightly doubtful about how long-term these effects of contact are, because I would imagine, like you mentioned, for example, the Northern Ireland situation, and you have all these projects for increased contact, etc. But you can imagine it's quite easy to elicit the sort of feeling of, you know, everyone returning to their own groups if there is threat. And I just wonder, how effective are these things long term? A lot of these things.
You seen the episode of Dairy Girls?
But a lot of the measures
Catholics like walking, Protestants like marching.
always realistic, the measures in themselves are not realistic.
Well, that's the big issue, like in social and political psychology, and it's in so many disciplines because how you can reach a long-term effect. So the issue is that this can be informative, right? It can be informative for people like who work with police and take these measures, and at least you have this information that if people have more contact, then they will be more open to work on another. But I feel in terms of long-term effects, it's hard because like you have the person and the person reads something and okay, so he's nice, he has this positive report, but then you go back to their friends, you go back to the family, and then again that norm that he has presented is getting activated, which then kind of prevents the impact of contact. So it's very difficult in terms of long-term effect if there is no collaboration or support from, as I mentioned, from authorities, because I think we only can inform them, and then that's.
So I suppose your experiments are kind of illustrative of maybe things that might happen in the real world, like, you know, maybe these are kind of vignettes and so on, but you could still imagine that thing of my friend has made friends with somebody or works with somebody who's a refugee, and they now tell me all the time about their new friend, so-and-so, and you know what they've been through, or just you know what they're like in work and what they like to eat, and you know whatever various things about them. And you can imagine that actually having a long-term effect, because that's not just a vignette in the lab.
No, it can
real, like extended contact.
Yeah, it can apply. Yeah, I mean, I think I kind of meant that it can apply to life setting, because even the information that if people have contact, so especially when it comes to conflict-violent setting, when people don't have contact, and then the authorities there, they don't really support. So it's like, and especially with European Union, we try to, some people can freely travel freely, some people cannot travel freely, and we see that if people don't have contact and they don't go to each other's country, we see that then they are biased. So I feel like in terms of the information, they really tell us a lot, but then how much willing we are to implement this information, then it's not something that depends on us as researcher.
Yeah.
But it tells how real life processes, are in place.
It's almost like illustrative of what is potentially possible. So if you can show, like, we just did this small thing and it had an effect, yes, it's going to disappear now because they're all going to go back to the thing.
But even the measures are a little, I'm not talking about your work particularly, I just in general, sometimes I worry a little bit that the measures themselves even are not very strong, and that, underneath it, people are reporting, these are specific cases of people I know, or yes, my friend is a friend, and that's all fine. But I think maybe there's two different sorts of. There's this type of group where somebody's coming into my country, and there's the Northern Ireland situation, which is a very long ingrained problem. That is a bit different, maybe.
I think there's a third group, because I was similar to Christina, sort of like with disability, and I not as much in terms of obesity and prejudice and stigma, and this contact is there. It's like almost like a third group, a third type, and it's really interesting to think.
I think I showed the case like from e-contact. So even Northern Ireland, like they think when they have this. I think that was like, so when people had the opportunity to contact with one another in a kind of online environment, then people show less anxiety and have more positive expectation, both Catholics and Protestants. So this
Those
is
effects are pretty small though, aren't they?
well, they are, like
Yeah.
here, no, this is Catholic and Protestant, but they are compared to the Beltline. So you need to compare this.
Yeah, I am, but they're still fairly small, like.
Because.
Yeah, and that sample size are small as well.
Yeah, well, I don't know if there have been also studies, but e-contact seems to work because most of the e-contact studies are Northern Ireland. But I mean, this is a bit kind of informative. It means that if people, you engage them in something, then they might be okay to work with one another. But then, and that's the researcher's role. Like they cannot, like it's not in our power to go and really, create that setting. But this can be very informative for authorities in both sides, for example. But then how much they want this, it's something that they decide. We cannot really decide, right? Or if we go to an intergroup, like in conflictual intergroup setting, then we can tell them what happened if they do this or that, but then it depends on if people want to interact or not. We cannot impose that.
That's another experiment.
Damn.
Any other questions?
Thanks, that's all.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.